Hey there, Duke fans. It is an exciting day. Welcome to episode 144 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. I'm your host this week, Jason Evans. Before I bring in my two partners in crime, I want to, as always, thank our sponsors, the Legal Eagles from Byrd Campbell, a pair of former Dukies. They have law offices in Florida and Texas. If you have any legal needs, reach out to them at byrdcampbell.com. We'll mention them more later, but before we get to that, we got to talk about UVA, the Blue Devils, with a big victory. And here to help me recap it, talk about it, and look ahead to what's coming up on the schedule, my usual partners in crime in Durham, North Carolina, at Duke, the guy who was at the game last night, Sam Klein. How you doing, Sam?
Man, yesterday was vintage Cameron, as they say. It was rocking and rolling. There was even a point during the game where all the people upstairs stood up. So
wow,
there you go.
If you've been lucky enough to attend a Duke men's basketball game in Cameron Indoor Stadium, you know that when the Crusties stand up, things have gotten pretty serious.
I like that. And I tell you what, I want us to, whatever we do, when we talk about the UVA game, do not talk about the crowd, the signs, any of that stuff. Put that aside, because we're going to come back to that in a little bit after we talk about the game. So don't say that during your game recap. My other guy who was watching this game in Washington, D.C., Donald Wine. Donald, where were you viewing this fine affair?
I was viewing it from one of my favorite watering hole establishments here in D.C., just down the street from where I live. But, Sam, I am over the moon jealous that you were in Cameron and that I was not standing next to you.
Yeah, by the way, so I've got a funny story really quick to tell about how I watched the game. So I am... Folks don't know this about me yet, but I am a public address announcer for a high school basketball team here in Atlanta. And so occasionally I have to record the Duke games and watch them later because I'm busy announcing the games for the Galloway High School.
Jason,
yes.
I didn't know this. Can you give us
Yeah, we need background now.
Yeah, I know. I don't need the background. I don't need the background because I feel like I've gotten to know you well enough to understand that this is definitely on brand for you. But I do want to hear. Can we just get like a sample of some of the calls? Like, do you have any signature lines? And anything like that?
I do a lot of the stuttering thing. There's several players in the team who have W names, so I go, "We'll win for 3," and stuff like that.
Wait, seriously?
Yes.
So
yes.
you're like a hype man.
Big time. I have a great, and by the way, the team that I call last night, they won. They're 14-4 now on the season. They're like one of the top 10 teams in the state of Georgia, which is like crazy. But wait, so I brought this up because I was recording the game and I told everyone around me, hey, I'm radio silent. I'm not checking messages. I'm not looking at my phone. And there's like 5 minutes left in the basketball game that I'm calling. And the athletic director comes up to me at a timeout and he goes, "Oh man, Duke's up 1 with 3 minutes left. This is a really great game. I can't believe you're not watching it." And I'm like, "What the heck? Oh my God, the guy totally
ruined it." Like, although you know what that tells you though, like at least he didn't come and tell you how it ended. Like telling you that it's a 1-point game with 3 minutes left, you're probably like, all right, well, I'm excited to watch.
Yeah, exactly. But I was like, I will admit that when I watched the replay, there were a couple times where Duke was stretching it out a little bit, and I was like, "Oh well, we're not going to. This is not going to continue," because I knew it was going to be a 1-point game with 3 minutes left. But so enough of that preamble. We've spent enough time talking about how the game was almost ruined for Jason. He was, by the way, when I told him that I'd been radio silent, he felt terrible about it. So at least there was some remorse. But Donald, I'm going to go to you first. We're going to save Sam and his observations from the game. Give me your big takeaways from a huge win over the Virginia Cavaliers, a very exciting game. Really the RJ and Zion show. That's what it was.
Yeah, absolutely on offense. But I want to start with a little thing that I noticed during this game. Both teams in this game played absurd defense at points of this game. And really, when you look at the stats for this game, it's incredible to see that both teams combined only made 5 3-pointers. Both teams combined, or both teams attempted 50 or 51 field goal attempts. We're usually at 80 for some games. So the pace was way down. The pace kind of trended in the favor of UVA. The style of play trended in the form of UVA. Both teams only had 8 turnovers. So it wasn't like we were taking a lot of terrible shots or forcing into turnovers. It was a very clean game, other than the fact that we were going to the free throw line a lot. I think in the end, when you look at this game, we had a game where one team completely dictated the pace of play. One team played their game and the other team didn't. The other team that didn't won this basketball game. And I think that's kind of one of those victories that you need going down the stretch. When you're looking at the season, we're going to look at this game as a time where Duke was kind of, even in the confines of Cameron Indoor Stadium, was taken out of their comfort zone a little bit, but still the game was never really in doubt in the sense that it wasn't where UVA pulled away a lot. We went up a while and then they start to trickle back, but you kind of expected that. And with the, air around Trey Jones, whether he would play or not, obviously we predicted correctly that he was not going to play. But with him being on the bench and just, in street clothes and not available for the game, people were kind of like, okay, well, UVA is going to take their shots and they're probably going to, pull away a little bit. We'll probably catch up and it'll be back and forth. This game was, one of those games where it went back and forth the whole game. And at no point in this game did I think it was over until, about 2 seconds left when I realized that a 2-point shot could not make up 4 points. And I really attribute that to, a heart, at the heart of this team, that they were able to really just, play basketball last night. And both teams played great basketball at stretches. Sometimes it was like classic case of just, open shots being missed like we've seen before. But this team really, found something that I didn't think they had, and that was heart. And that's something that you really need in a champion. I saw that last night in our Blue Devils.
I'll tell you.
Go ahead, Jason.
Really quick. Donald, I wish I had the stat on me. I read it someplace last night and I meant to write it down. I didn't. I think I read that for 16 of the 20 minutes of the second half, the team that had the ball, it was one possession game. Like
right.
That's just insane. I think I read that the team that had the ball either had a chance to take the lead or tie the game up on, all but about 10 or 12 possessions of the second half, which is just crazy. Yeah. So sorry, Sam, I interrupted you. Sam, give us a little bit of stuff. We're going to be going back and forth on this a lot. So
yeah, that's fine. I did want to start. Donald mentioned the at the end of the game, he only thought Duke was going to win when UVA launched a 2-pointer with time expiring, and he was like, "Oh, I guess we're up by 4 points." Did you guys happen to notice that the line on this game was
3.5?
Oh my God. That 2-pointer that might not have beaten the buzzer. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it did beat the buzzer. I was paying attention to it because one of my buddies texted me right at the beginning of the game. He's a college basketball fan, but he's not a Duke fan, and he doesn't have any particular Duke animosity or anything. But one of my friends was in Las Vegas yesterday and had bet on Duke at -3.5, and he sent me a picture of his ticket, and he was like, "Here you go, like, let's go Duke." And I said to him, Trey Jones is out. I don't know if that's a great line for Duke. Like that, I would have stayed away from this game, etc. And I especially wasn't taking Duke minus a few points, even at home, just because of the circumstances around the game. I said, I don't know, man. I don't know. And I was watching it right down to the buzzer, and I thought, oh no, UVA is still trying. They're gonna make a shot here at the end, and they're gonna cover. They beat it. I was paying very close attention to this. The ball was in flight when the buzzer sounded, and then went through the hoop after. So wait, this bad beat came in after the buzzer sounded.
I have to tell you, so a lot of people know about this. There is a contest on the Duke Basketball Report bulletin boards, the Degenerate Gambler contest that I run. And I had bet on UVA. It is the first time in the 3 years we've been doing this contest that I bet against Duke, because I was like 3.5 points. I mean, like, this game's probably a toss-up without Trey Jones. So I bet on UVA getting 3.5. And I also bet the over. And in the final minute, there were 15 points scored in the final minute to help us get to the over. The over looked like it was not going to happen. And and Virginia covered in a game where it looked like they might not cover. Literally the final 20 seconds or so saved my bacon in the gambling contest. But hey, I'll take it. We get a win and I get a cover. That's perfectly good, if you ask me. Sorry, Sam, I interrupted you.
I don't know if this is going to be. I don't know if you guys watch. Sorry, I don't know if you guys watch the late Sports Center with
Sports
Scott
Center,
Van Pelt.
The Bad Beats.
I don't know if this is going to be a bad beats, but this is under consideration because literally the last 0.1 seconds of the game went from you won you covered to losing it.
This is like the Austin Rivers game in Chapel Hill where UNC led for the entire second half except after the buzzer sounded. They led for the duration of the clock. And then Duke only took the lead after the buzzer sounded. But I'm sure that SVP is going to mention this because one, it happened and it's like a classic case, but two, it was also a huge game. So I'm sure there was a lot of money on this game as a marquee college basketball matchup that happened over the weekend. I did want to leave the gambling sphere and actually come back and talk about the game though, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
There were a couple of we might as well. There were a couple of interesting things that I noted from this game that sort of stood out to me as Duke making changes. And this is, I guess, the credit to Coach K for updating the game plan without Trey Jones and having those things work, let's say, effectively enough to beat arguably the best team in the country in Virginia. At least the game was in Cameron, of course, but still the toughest opponent that Duke is going to face this year. On the offensive side, Duke was running a much more like weave motion kind of offense that was sort of indicative of old Duke. Like this is the kind of offense that you might have seen Jason Williams and Shane Battier and Mike Dunleavy running, but not something that we've seen in recent years from Duke when they have guys that are more able to drive and kick. This team was moving the ball around the perimeter to try to get Zion or RJ into exactly the right place, at least in the half court offense. And we talked before the game about how Duke doesn't want to get into a half court game with UVA. They managed to. They had very few fast break points. They had to play from the half court, and they still managed to score 72 against a team that notoriously keeps opponents under 70.
Sam, real quick, what you were just talking about, the offense that they were doing, that kind of weave offense. When I was watching it last night, I was noticing it the same way you were. 2 times that I remember that particular offense being run for particular players. One was back in 2016 when we had Brandon Ingram, and he would like to come off of that screen that you get with the ball and drive to the basket. And also Gerald Henderson back in 2009 in that Maryland game when they hurt Nolan Smith in the very next play, he came and dunked the life out of the Comcast Center.
Yes, I remember. We've talked about that game. I was at that game.
I was at that game as well. Yeah,
we were both at that game. I remember that. That one stands out. But no, great point. This is the kind of offense that Coach K likes to run. We just don't get to see it as much because the composition of the team has not been conducive to that style of offense, and Coach K is not going to Jim Boeheim his way into shoehorning square pegs into round holes or what have you. So that was on offense that was so amazing, and of course, it was primarily RJ and Zion doing the scoring, but the ball was moving around a little more than I think I expected it to. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Duke employed a zone for a good chunk of the second half, which I think they had previewed very lightly in a couple other games so far this year, but of course hadn't really used extensively. I think this was the first game where Duke extensively went to zone, and primarily I think it was a result of Marquise Bolden and Javin DeLaurier both being in foul trouble. DeLaurier fouled out with 5 or 6 minutes left in the game, and Bolden had to play the rest of the game with 4 fouls and sort of had to be careful, and he almost fouled out. The refs were calling this game pretty tight, so Duke had to go into the zone to try to limit the foul damage, and worked pretty well against UVA. The UVA offense, of course, is notably they're slow, but they are very deliberate, and they're good at getting the ball into the right places. If you take a look at the shot chart, I know that I think we've done this a couple times in games. If you take a look at the shot chart from this game, I think it's really indicative of how the game went, because UVA has a handful of shots that they were taking from sort of just inside the 3-point line and outside the paint, kind of the inefficient 2-pointer area. They have a handful of those. Duke took almost no shots in that space. There are 2 that aren't touching the paint or are outside of the 3-point line. Now, of course, Duke missed a lot of those 3-pointers that they took, but the efficiency play from Duke on defense, forcing Virginia into bad shots was evident. And it was impressive that Duke was able to get Virginia kind of off of its offensive game, because, we talk about the Cavaliers being this great defensive juggernaut. They've been just as efficient on offense as they have on defense the last couple of years. It's just that they play slow. So you assume that, if they play slow, or if they only score in the 60s, how could they have such a good offense? They do. They just pick their spots, and Duke forced them to pick bad spots last night, just enough to overcome the bad free throw shooting from the Blue Devils.
Well, so I think in our preview a few days ago, Sam, you asked me, hey, how is Duke going to succeed? What are they going to do without Trey Jones? And I said, they're going to be long. And I think you talked about that 2-3 zone. I think Duke's length, when we were playing that 2-3 zone, the guys up top are all 6'7" with like arms that are just ridiculous. I think Duke's length frustrated Virginia. I mean, part of Virginia's struggles was they couldn't hit 3-pointers the way they usually did. They're one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country. And you guys talked about the fact that they only hit 3-pointers the entire game. Part of that was Virginia was cold. Part of that was Duke's length was contesting those shots and making Virginia really, really work for their points. And then, Sam, you just mentioned the notion of where Duke was taking their shots. I think Virginia was shocked by the way Zion and R.J. Barrett were able to get into the lane and finish through contact. There were numerous times where Salt and Huff, they're the two Virginia big men who are strong guys. These are dudes they are used to being the strongest dudes on the floor, and not when Zion is in the house. They would hammer Zion on the arms and he would finish anyway. And this, of course, takes me to the dunk. CBS wrote a little paragraph about Zion going this was in the first half. I think Duke was leading like 20-17, something like that. And Zion gets the ball on a rebound and he goes full court. The entire Virginia defense tries to stop him. This is not something where, he beat everyone up the floor. All the Virginia guys are back and they tried to stop him and he just crossed them up and went around them. So, and then he dunks on Huff. And CBS, I have to read to you what CBS said about this. Williamson tomahawked on Huff so hard that Virginia coach Tony Bennett immediately removed the 7'1" center from the game, presumably so his team staff could make sure that Huff was still alive.
Look, we didn't do the overly dramatic intro to this show that we did last week when talking about Zion's 360 or 2 weeks ago. But we just as easily could have, because Zion was digging Jay Huff's grave from 10 feet in the air.
Oh, look, that was sick.
Can we talk about this? I mean, I've talked with Sam about this many times. When that first dunk happened in the Clemson game, the and one alley-oop over somebody, and some guy just literally hit his right arm as he dunked it with his right arm anyway, his offhand, by the way. We have this thing called retirement, and players are not respecting the game when they get dunked so hard that they have to retire, and yet they still keep playing. Jay Huff played 6 more minutes after that dunk, when he should have just retired from the game of basketball. And I need teams to understand that when Zion dunks you into a grave, you can't come out of that. There's no coming back, and you should just go ahead and find a new career.
The funny thing was Huff was in this stretch where he was playing really well. He'd hit a couple field goals. He had a really nice block shot. I mean, Huff was playing as well as he can play. And then Zion did that to him. And it's like, he went, okay, I'm not, you may be right. He still played more in the game after that, but he was a non-factor the rest of the game.
Well, the minor storyline here is that Jay Huff is from Durham. So
yes. Yeah.
He was probably psyched to be playing in Cameron, and had a couple of good plays. He made I think he made a block and then had a dunk right after it. So he was sort of feeling himself. And I looked at one of my friends in the student section while that was all going on, and I said, Zion looks like he's angry, and he looks like he's angry at that Huff guy. I wouldn't want to be. I don't know what's going to happen to him the next 2 minutes, but something horrible is going to happen to him or his family. And it was him. It was very mean. as you guys just said, that it wasn't like Duke beat all of those guys down the floor, or Zion beat all of those guys down the floor. Zion just wove through all of them and finished with his non-dominant hand through another human being.
I think the thing that's most surprising about Zion's game is his handle, his shiftiness, which to me, that's the part, that and the body control, his ability to absorb contact and still make baskets. Those are the things that have surprised me the most about his game this season. But I want to also talk about RJ Barrett for a minute, because in a game where we were missing Trey Jones, and so we were not getting the kind of assists that we usually get. We weren't getting the kind of defensive pressure that leads to runouts and fast breaks quite in the way we usually get them. Zion and RJ were so they absolutely showed why they are the two best players in college basketball, and I'm serious about that. They are the two best players in college basketball. They played 79 of the 80 minutes between the two of them. They scored 57 of Duke's 72 points. And in the second half, they made all Duke's baskets except for one. I mean, these two guys absolutely took over the game against the best defensive team in the country. And I want to point something out. I was looking at some of the, the offensive efficiency kind of stats and the such. Do you know that from an adjusted offensive efficiency standpoint, meaning if you look at the quality of the defense that you're playing and you adjust your offensive performance to reflect the fact that you're playing a good or a bad defensive team, from an adjusted offensive efficiency standpoint, this was Duke's best game other than the Kentucky game. Think about that. That you just watched without Trey Jones. You just watched Duke's second best offensive game of the entire season.
And wait, what happened in the Kentucky game?
I think
we did something. Yeah, we won a lot.
118 to 40 or something like that.
Hey, did they score 40? Did we allow them to score 40?
Yeah, it was mercy. I mentioned that we were going to talk about the crowd and talk about the signs. And so, Sam, I'm going to go to you on this. But first, I have to ask, what do you all think? There was a big sign that was on TV a lot, and I was a little bit like, I don't know. But on the other hand, it's kind of good. That called RJ Barrett the Maple Mamba.
Yo, I'm in. I'm in. I saw it during game day, and I went to a little bit of College Game Day yesterday and sat. I wasn't in the Crazies area. I was sort of sitting off to the other side so that I could watch the show. And I actually thought Maple Mamba was a great sign. I'm definitely in on it, and I thought that we needed that RJ Barrett needed some kind of nickname. I'm not sure if it's the nickname for him, but I think it's a very good start. And so if a Duke student came up with that, good job. My favorite sign was that 10-year challenge UVA rings sign. That was good.
Oh too. Yeah, that was pretty good.
Big fan of that. All the references to UMBC were obviously worthwhile because it was especially great. I think this game I think dropped UVA to a 16-1 record, which I saw going around on Twitter. So yeah, it was a strong day. My only thing about the signs is that students, if there are any students who listen to this show, be they undergrads or grad students, please don't hold up signs during the game. We can't see. Some of us are already severely challenged in the height department and are crammed into the student section and can barely see the court as it is. Once one of those signs goes up, I can't see anything. And they were handing out these blue like pom-pom things to they were like tossing them into the grad student section yesterday. So then all the students were then carrying arm extensions and waving them around. And again, I'm like 5'6". I can't really see the game anyway. Please just put that stuff down. We don't need this mess. But the signs were good. They were very creative, and I was happy that we did a good job with College Game Day in town.
I like the one that we had back, the one that we saw during the Clemson game, the grin, and it was a picture of RJ Barrett.
That one reappeared yesterday.
That one reappeared. I was happy to see that one again. Grin and Barrett. But I'm in on the Maple Mamba. I don't know, like you, Sam. I don't know if we could call him that. We might need to get permission from Kobe Bryant.
Wait, hold on. Very important. Somebody had a Blockadile Dundee sign at the game yesterday. I saw it, and I am submitting some trademark violation for that. Because I said that at least a week ago on the show, maybe 2 weeks ago. So whoever had the Blockadile Dundee sign, you owe me, dude or lady or whatever.
Well, Sam, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So the fact that they stole it from you means that they liked it and they thought it was good. The only we'll get to sincere imitation in my parting shot, I promise. The only thing about Maple Mamba to me is I don't want to think of RJ as the next Kobe Bryant. I mean, that incredibly flattering, and I'm sure he would take that career, but he's the first RJ Barrett. And I know that's sort of trite and obvious, and everybody says that kind of stuff, but I don't need RJ Barrett. I think is going to be enough of a player that he can get his own nickname that is half an homage to Kobe Bryant, and we still need a good nickname for Zion, although the human flying tractor is a little the flying bulldozer, I mean, is pretty good. So anyway. This edition of the DBR Podcast is brought to you by Byrd Campbell with law offices in Florida and Texas. We want to thank Byrd Campbell for being sponsors of the podcast. And if you want to reach out to them, you can do it at their website, BYRDCAMPBELL, byrdcampbell.com. Okay, guys, so we dispense with Virginia, and Duke has a big week coming up. We're going to extend the week from 7 days to 8 days to talk about 3 upcoming opponents. The Blue Devils will be facing on Tuesday. We have the Pitt Panthers. We travel our third ACC road game as we go up to face Pitt, and former Duke coach Capel is going to be on the sidelines there for Pitt. And Pitt is a surprising team. They are way, way, way better than anyone expected them to be. I think Capel perhaps is in the running for ACC Coach of the Year with the job he's doing. Donald, give me your assessment of the game against Pitt.
This is going to be one of those games that Pitt normally plays us pretty tough, especially at home. And those games are usually those games that we are closer than we would like. But when it comes to this game, obviously the storyline is the major factor here, right? With Jeff Capel coaching against Duke for the first time since he took over at Pitt. But I think that is going to motivate his players to want to play their tails off for their new coach. Coach Capel's not just going to sit there and say, "All right, Duke, come on in. We'll shake hands with Coach K and exchange a hug and all the guys, and then you guys can beat us by 40." That's not going to happen on Tuesday night. I think this is going to be one of those games where we can shoot them out of the game. But if we are, if we're one of those teams that we have been lately that has been kind of cold from beyond the arc, we're going to have to get the ball inside. And I think inside is where we still have an advantage, especially with Zion and RJ, taking care of things. So if we can kind of take care of the ball like we did against UVA, if we can kind of play the similar style of play where we're getting the ball inside and not really taking those 15 to 20 footers that aren't 3-pointers and really limiting what we do efficient on offense, I think we're going to be okay in this game. And here's the question, and I think it's going to be the question for these 3 games this week. Will we see Trey Jones? I'm not certain that we'll see him against Pitt on Tuesday. I think he is progressing fast, but I don't think they're going to want to rush him back. It may be where another full week off and we see him against Georgia Tech or Notre Dame, especially if Georgia Tech, I'm pretty sure Georgia Tech is that game at home, correct?
Yes. The Georgia Tech game is not in Atlanta.
So
I got a bunch of things coming in for that.
Right. So I think that's the game, right? I think that we won't see him against Pitt. And that means that we're going to see a similar lineup that we did against UVA with RJ, sometimes Cam Reddish, and even sometimes Zion bringing the ball up and having employing more of a bigger lineup. I think Goldwire may see some time in this game, but not nearly as much as we would see another backup point guard. So expect to see the similar lineup and expect to see a team that's going to really dominate inside the paint and take it to the Pitt Panthers.
So, I mean, the thing about Pitt is, and this is what's impressive that Capel's been able to do it in 1 year. They're actually a really good defensive team. They're one of the top 25 best defensive teams in the country. And full credit to Jeff Capel for turning these, very young team with a brand new coach, trying to figure it out, and full credit to Capel for turning them into a really good defensive team. I'm trying to look really quick. They're like almost exclusively freshmen and sophomores. They got one senior, but anyway, they hang their hat on defense. And unfortunately for Pitt, I feel like Duke is the kind of team that it's just really hard to be good at defense against Duke. I mean, we just saw what happened with UVA. It's almost impossible to keep RJ and Zion from getting to the rim. And Pitt is not a team that blocks shots really well. So I think it's just going to be really, really tough for them to keep Duke from the rim. And then the other thing Pitt doesn't do very well is they're not a great defensive rebounding team. They're ranked outside the top 300 in defensive rebounding percentage. And that could be a big problem against Duke, because Duke is a very good offensive rebounding team. So I think this is a really, really tough game for Pitt. They're going to have to do sort of the way, look, when Syracuse beat Duke, Syracuse didn't play the way Syracuse has in every other game this season. Syracuse was a way better offensive team, way better shooting team than they have been in any game this year. I think for Pitt to beat Duke, something like that's going to have to happen. Pitt's going to have to do something that we haven't seen them do all year. And that's sort of their chance in this game. If we get a even moderately normal Pitt team that shows up, Duke, I think, is still going to win fairly comfortably. Hey, Donald, I'm sorry, Sam. I'm going to go to you now for the next team. We're playing Georgia Tech on over the weekend on Saturday in Durham. You say you've got friends coming in town for that game. Give me a little preview of Georgia Tech. What do you think about the Yellow Jackets?
Georgia Tech is not having a strong season. Duke is pretty lucky that they made it past this UVA game, which was obviously a very tough opponent, because now they have a few games that are against not as good opponents as at least as UVA. So we talked about Pittsburgh being an interesting kind of road matchup with the whole Jeff Capel storyline. Georgia Tech doesn't really have an interesting storyline. They're 85th in KenPom this year. They've got a slew of losses, the worst of which is against Gardner-Webb. But they've lost to some of their local rivals like Tennessee and Georgia. Tennessee, of course, is one of the strongest teams in the country. And Georgia Tech got blown out yesterday by Louisville, and that was in Atlanta. So it's not things are not going well for Georgia Tech this season. I expect whether or not Trey Jones is back for that game, the team that we saw yesterday against UVA shouldn't really have much of a problem competing with Georgia Tech, especially with the game in Cameron. I think they'll probably be a bit overwhelmed. They don't have big star power or anything, so not anything specific that I'm looking for, but just kind of keeping it rolling. I wouldn't be surprised perhaps if we see, if Trey Jones is feeling good, maybe we see him in limited minutes to try to reintegrate him, but not the kind of game where Duke is going to need to go all out to beat the Yellow Jackets at home when Georgia Tech isn't even looking like a NCAA tournament team this season.
Yeah, and so here are a couple of things to note about Georgia Tech. They're not a good three-point shooting team. They hit less than 30% of their threes. They are a bad turnover team. They average like close to 21 turnovers a game, which is 21% of their possessions. Almost 1 in 5 possessions end up with a turnover, which is a big problem against Duke. And Tech is probably the thing that Tech does best is they're good at 3-point field goal percentage defense. They're really good at stopping teams from hitting threes. That's not the formula for beating Duke. Duke doesn't care about hitting threes. If they hit threes, it's a bonus. So I think Tech is in real trouble in this game. And Josh Pastner, who's a friend of the podcast, a guy that I've spoken to on a few occasions and who came on our show and talked to us at one point, I still vividly remember when we interviewed him last season, he talked about they need to get old. He needed players to be in the program for a long time and to really develop as a team, and that his success would be in years when he had lots of juniors and seniors on his team. Of the top, 7-8 guys on his team, he's got one junior and one senior. So Tech has not gotten old yet. And as a result, I think they're not good, and they're in a really bad stretch right now. You mentioned that Louisville game where they lost by 28 points at home. They lost to Clemson by double digits just the day before, a few days before that. They don't look good at all. It looks like Tech and Wake Forest are sort of battling for the bottom of the ACC, and Boston College also. So,
and we're playing Boston College pretty soon too.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't see us having much trouble against Georgia Tech. So that's two of the review. The last of them next Monday. And it comes literally, Georgia Tech on Saturday, and then the game on Monday. We're stretching it all to make it into 1 week of broadcasts for you folks. We're going to preview the Notre Dame game. Duke goes up to Notre Dame on Big Monday. We know, when you're Duke, when you're highly ranked, and you're at Notre Dame, that's sort of Notre Dame's wheelhouse. The Fighting Irish love those kind of games. They always seem to rise to the occasion. Guys, I'll toss it to both of you. I don't know which one of you wants to take the lead on Notre Dame and tell us a little bit about what we should expect in that contest.
Well, first of all, we have to make this stat known. This will be the first game that Duke has played against Notre Dame in 75 years. Bonzi Colson will not be on the floor. He's finally graduated and exhausted his 75 years of eligibility and will not be playing on Monday. But it's weird. This game, in all seriousness, this game is interesting because, like you said, Jason, we normally don't do well in South Bend against the Fighting Irish. But this year, the Fighting Irish team that we will see is almost a shell of itself compared to teams we've seen in years past that have competed for ACC titles. They've had a pretty tough week this past week. They lost to you and at UNC and then against NC State. But the
UNC game, by the way, the UNC game, very, very competitive. Like, they looked good in that game.
Yeah, and the thing about their team is they're always going to be scrappy, right? Like, Mike Bray is not going to field the team that's going to lay over and die on anybody. And they haven't, all their losses, if you look at them, they're not by that much. There's only been a couple games where the game kind of got away from them. But it's really just execution that has been their problem so far this season. Now, against them, this is going to be one of those games. Again, we're going to have a game on Saturday and then a game on Monday. One where we are traveling to South Bend instead of staying at home after that Saturday. So not only do we have to contend with the, playing a game on Saturday, we also have to contend with flying to South Bend and then turning it around 48 hours later and playing against the Fighting Irish. So that's going to be a game where I think it's going to be a little bit sloppy, but it's going to be one where, again, if Trey Jones is back, I think we will have a much better time against the Fighting Irish with regards to our defense. Obviously, that is not something that should be a surprise to anybody, but especially with defense, when the Fighting Irish come up against a tough defense, they like to kind of wilt a little bit down the stretch, and that's really where we're going to have them. And it's not going to be a game where I think is going to be particularly close, but it's going to be one that until the final minutes is going to be something that we're going to have to, play our A game. And if we can do that against the Fighting Irish with this team, they don't have a lot of great scorers. They have, a couple guys that you may have heard of, like John Mooney. But I think in the end, we have the talent to outmatch them. We just have to go out and do it.
The tough thing in this game is that it's one of the few this season where Duke is going to have a somewhat tight turnaround. They play Saturday afternoon against Georgia Tech here in Cameron, and then have to fly up to South Bend. So they're not going to have a lot of time to change anything up. I doubt, for example, if we're going back to reintegrating Trey Jones, I doubt that you're going to see his minutes significantly increase from the Georgia Tech game to the Notre Dame game.
Right.
So be on the lookout for that, I guess. And maybe there could be a bit of a fatigue issue just because they're going on the road on a quick turnaround.
So really quick about Notre Dame, two things I want to point out. The first one is, to some extent, they're the opposite of Georgia Tech in that they're a team that holds on to the ball really well. They do not commit turnovers, which, Duke thrives off of that. So, if we turn Notre Dame over at all, they're in huge trouble because Notre Dame, they're just not good enough at other things to be able to afford to commit turnovers. And then the other thing is, it is definitely worth noting, Duke's on the Saturday to Monday turnaround. Notre Dame's also on the Saturday to Monday turnaround. Notre Dame's Saturday game is at home, so they don't travel at all, which is good for them. But their Saturday game is against UVA. And Virginia is, as we just saw, really physical, really good. They will get you out of your comfort zone on offense. It's really hard to feel good about how you play against Virginia. What a nightmare for any team, to say nothing of a team that, that's, not a tournament team, to have a 48-hour period where you're playing Virginia and Duke, like almost certainly the two best teams in the country. Wow. I feel for Notre Dame, and don't be surprised if you see, perhaps a little bit tired and dejected Notre Dame team on Monday if Virginia's really giving it to them hard on Saturday. We're getting ready to wrap things up here. It is time for our Player of the Week picks. Sam, I will go to you first. And by the way, not just the Virginia game. Remember, we also played Syracuse earlier in the week.
So in addition to all the highlights, Zion Williamson went for 62 points across the two games on just 36 shots, and he missed a ton of free throws along the way. That is crazy efficiency. Duke fans, we've been talking about this all year, just about how nuts Zion Williamson is, and I think sometimes this happened last year with Marvin Bagley too. But don't lose sight of that. He's an incredible talent and showed it again in both of the games this week, and most importantly against UVA. It felt like he turned it up to another level and was able to kind of take over the game and be the driving force along with RJ Barrett for that win. So I'm taking Zion Williamson for the efficiency and also for the unfortunate murder of Jay Huff.
Donald, who you got?
I'm also going with Zion for a lot of the reasons that Sam mentioned. At least one execution, 700 points, 350 rebounds, and really, honestly, just getting to the rack and finishing while having the entire team, opposing team, hack him on the way up and down, and still making it. I think that sort of ability is something that we haven't seen in college basketball in a very long time, if not ever. And I think we're really blessed to be watching that. But for the reasons that Sam mentioned, especially the execution of Jay Huff, I'm giving it to Zion.
So RJ Barrett this week had 12 assists and only 2 turnovers, and impromptu out of nowhere had to take over the point guard duties. And I thought did a very commendable job with it. But it's not the week. There's not even any question about it. No reason to talk about it any more than you guys already had. He's just on another level, and there's nothing more to say than that. And I'm pleased that the police have chosen not to arrest him for murdering Jay Huff. Guys, we move on from Player of the Week to parting shots. Sam, you've got a good one. Give me your parting shot.
So when I came back to Duke this past summer, as folks know from, I guess, listening to the show, I quickly realized that there was an undergraduate Duke student whose name is also Sam Klein, and his name shows up first in the internal Duke.edu directory ahead of mine. So he gets a lot of my emails and I don't get any of his. So occasionally people send him an email, think they got me. Turns out they didn't. He has to forward me the emails. He's been extremely nice about it. We haven't.
Wait. Are these emails from fans? Are these?
No. Just regular people from around school. People need my email address. and as if I like had a real job or something. And so people occasionally send new Sam Klein, who's an undergraduate student. They send him my emails, and he forwards them to me, and he's very nice about it. And I've occasionally responded and been like, hey, thanks again for dealing with all this. I'm sorry, and like I owe you a beer at some point. I think he's a senior, so it's okay. So fast forward to yesterday at the game. It turns out that that new Sam Klein works in the Duke SID office and has some. I don't know exactly what he's doing for the athletic department, but it was something that it compelled ESPN to specifically mention him during the game and put up a graphic with like his name and his hometown and stuff. And
Sam, so you wouldn't know this, but it was because they were doing a Cameron Crazy cam during the broadcast, and he was the guy in the stands holding the camera.
Yeah. He was okay. So he was on Cameron Crazy Cam.
Or yes, he was running. He was the cam. Yeah,
got it. Okay, so Sam,
he got a ton of screen time, by the way.
Yeah, he got a ton of screen time. Young man, I guess, is he's very into Duke basketball, but because his name showed up on the screen, I then was sent a flurry of screenshots of this moment, including one from Donald, a bunch of my current classmates, old Duke friends, other people watching the game. People were all sending this to me, and they were like, "What is this? What's going on? You don't study political science, and you already did undergraduate at Duke. Why are you doing this again?" So anyway, I emailed him. I emailed new Sam Klein this morning just to tell him that we're even now because I had to get assaulted by all of his shout outs. And so apparently there's somebody who's like stealing my identity. He works for the athletic department. He's a big Duke basketball fan. So I'm just gonna have to sort all that out. So we talked about mistaken identities earlier, or flattery, and this is imitation to a point where I'm not sure I can take it anymore.
Well, you guys gotta have a duel. One of you's got to go. Either one of you has to graduate. That's pretty much how it's gonna work.
Well, I think he's a senior, so he's gonna graduate this year.
Well, he's going to have to. I mean, it's going to have to happen before the end of basketball season.
If that kid comes back and goes to Fuqua,
he'll probably just enroll under your name. Like, yeah, I was here last year.
If I ever get a chance to meet him, I'll let you guys know.
I have to tell you guys, there was after I'd been at CNN for several years, there was a new employee who was also named Jason Evans, and he sort of hated the fact that like he couldn't get the best logins or email addresses and things like that because I already had them. But what he really hated was because I was kind of well known around the company, people started calling him Dos, like because he was the second Jason Evans. He hated that. And even after I left CNN, people still called him Dos. And he was just like, this is the worst ever. So sucks to have the same name as someone.
There actually was a Samantha Klein who was a couple years behind me at Duke. I didn't know her all that well, but I did get one somewhat inappropriate sorority email that was meant for her once.
And to round this out,
I don't think I can share that here. Donald.
But to round this out, I worked at General Motors as one of my first jobs, and luckily for me, everyone knew my email address. And unfortunately, there was someone else in the company, a company of over, at that time, over 350,000 employees that was also named down the line. The good thing is it happened to be my father. So I was getting his emails to this day. I still get LinkedIn requests from people that he worked with thinking that they think that I am him, which is incredible considering that my face is on my LinkedIn profile. So they would know I am not my father. But that has been something that, especially GM, even after I left, my dad was getting emails designed to reach me. And I was getting emails especially as, again, in a company of 350,000 people, 2 people were getting each other's emails because we had the same name.
Donald, it is your turn to give us a parting shot. Now that we're done talking about how there are doppelgangers of us all over the place, what you got for a parting shot?
Yeah, so on Friday night, I don't know if you guys have seen these yet. And Jason, I know you're kind of in the movies, but I was watching a couple of documentaries that came out this week. One And they're both about the same thing. They're both about that Fyre Festival.
Fyre Festival, yeah.
And so I watched the Netflix version on Friday night, early Friday night. I had nothing to do. It was really a quiet night for me, so I was watching a few documentaries. So I started with that one. That thing was incredibly wild. Like the whole storyline behind how this was planned, how basically the Netflix version focuses on the setting up of the actual event, of the failed event, the event that never took place, and really focuses in on the customers, the people who paid for this. And still, even, as this was approaching, where they're like, hey, we're not getting any information, we don't have a flight, we don't have this, we don't have that, they were still putting money into this while this guy was, really using it to defraud everybody around him. Was kind of incredible. And so I was fascinated about this, and I was like, you know what, I have to watch the Hulu version of this, which was a documentary that came out on Tuesday, and they kind of brought it out to kind of put a damper in the hype that the Netflix version was getting. So I didn't have Hulu, so I literally signed up for a free month trial just so I could watch this documentary. And it was also fascinating because that focused more on the guy behind Fyre Festival, Billy McFarland, and basically how he literally has led a complete career of defrauding people everywhere he goes, and how this should have been a red flag from the moment he put his name behind it, and it wasn't. It was kind of fascinating to see how this whole thing took place and how so many people were involved in it and knew that it was a sinking ship, and still it still progressed to the point where it did, where they had 7,000-8,000 people stranded on a island in the Bahamas with nowhere to go, no place to stay, and having been wiped out of a lot of their money. So two fascinating documentaries. I would encourage you to check them out. The one on Netflix is called Fyre, Fyre, and the one on Hulu is called Fyre Fraud. And so I would highly suggest, if you have both Netflix and Hulu, to watch both, because they're absolutely amazing.
So for my parting shot, I happened last night. I was very fortunate. I got to talk to a guy. I don't want to say he's a professional gambler. He's someone who gambles a lot. Let's just put it that way, and not in trivial amounts. And he gambles a lot on college basketball. This is someone I get to talk to occasionally. I guess you could sort of say he's a friend. And we happen to be talking about this college basketball season, as not surprising about that. And we were mentioning the fact that that there's a chance that Duke, despite losing to Syracuse, will remain the number one team in the country because we took out Virginia. And because everyone expects Trey Jones to be back very soon, and everyone sort of discounts that Syracuse loss as a result. And I said, actually, I think that Tennessee was number 3 in both the polls. Duke lost to Syracuse, Virginia lost to Duke. I think Tennessee will probably go to number 1. And he said he's watched Tennessee play a couple times, and he said, look, from the standpoint of a gambler, he said, as far as I'm concerned, the polls should reflect what, who the best team is. Who would the gamblers bet on if they were at a neutral site? He said, I would not bet on Tennessee against Duke unless Tennessee was getting 4 or 5 points. He said, you tell me Tennessee +2, Tennessee +3. He said, I'm taking Duke every day and twice on Sunday. He said, there's no question in his mind that Tennessee does not deserve to be number 1. And he thinks, especially once they get Trey Jones back, that Duke is unquestioned the number 1 team in the country. He said the only team he's seen who is close to Duke is Virginia. He likes Michigan State. He actually likes them better than Michigan. But the polls are going to come out, and I think Tennessee's going to be the number 1 team. I'm just telling you that the money would favor Duke. So that's my parting shot.
I like it.
Thank you. That's going to wrap it up for us here on episode 144 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast, a podcast where we thoroughly enjoyed talking about a victory over the Virginia Cavaliers. By the way, guys, have you looked at the ACC standings lately? There are 6 teams at 4-1. It is a jam-packed group of teams at the top of the ACC. Duke has 3 big games coming up in the next 8 days, and we hope the Devils will get 3 victories and set ourselves apart from the rest of the conference a little bit. Until those 3 games are done, we're going to take a little break. So for Donald Wine and Sam Klein, I am Jason Evans. Thanks so much for joining us once again, and it's time for the Duke Band to play us home.